thanks to Laura and others on the Sage team for having me out. It's so fantastic to see everybody and be in such a beautiful area. I do miss Seattle. And so, yeah, as Sully said, we think a lot about big data, and I always like to take a step back. I've shown this slide for a long time about the scale of the digital universe, that in 2011 we surpassed this zettabyte of data, just unimaginable scale of data that's now in the digital universe, and that continues to advance at an exponential pace. And when I think about all that's happening in the connectivity of our world and the data and the engagement, I think of like how many people here play a League of Legends video game? Like, are there any religious adherents? So neither do I, but I have kids, and these kids are hellishly focused on this type of game. And as I try to encourage them to focus on math and other things, what they told me was, and I verified, that in 2018, more people watched the World Championship for the League of Legends video game than watched the Super Bowl, Baseball World Series, and NBA Finals combined. Like, just a shocking thing, and I hadn't even known that people actually watch other people play video games. Like, it was like just shocking to me. So just like how much the world changes that way, and that as you're hearing from all the previous speakers, amazing what they're doing, the panel on just all the scales of data. And the one thing, as Oli said, I focused a lot on, along with others here, on the genomics side. And what drew me on the genomics side as a math computing guy was, only technology known to humankind moving at a super Moore's law speed. So we as humans have never witnessed the technology moving this fast and so disruptive, and we can't even really predict what all is going to happen. And of course, then it's being linked to all these technologies moving at Moore's law speed. And some of the things I think about, like, I'm like a guy like just like bring it on. You never get enough. But the video game thing kind of shook me as getting older. The other things though I see like that are pretty amazing. To think about like how pervasive AI is becoming and the kind of world it's driving forward. Recent paper showing this ability to generate a whole planet. What you're seeing here are artificially intelligent generated faces. These people do not exist on the planet. They're being generated through the computer and nearly indistinguishable from the kind of people you would expect to meet in any region. You have the first completely AI-driven digital reporter, reporting on the news, both thinking of what needs to be reporting and then conveying that now routinely in China. And then this paper and a wave of other papers, this kind of one of the leading papers that sort of drove this idea that not only could you teach computers to play better games at a superior level, but you could do it with no human knowledge being input. So in the Mastering Go and this DeepMind project, just teaching the computer the rules of the game and letting it teach itself how to play, and then able to beat any human player or any other software game player, and just how quickly that's going, even on the reasoning side, to see companies like OpenAI and the big investments that are going into that and starting to see actual reasoning capabilities emerge and so on. And yet when I went to Mount Sinai, and so this is, Stephen, friend, longtime partner, helped me think along these lines. And when I went to Mount Sinai, so despite all this amazingness happening, what are the physicians doing with the patients? They're like looking at disease as this binary sort of decision. When patient comes in, you're either sick or you're well. So if you have biomarkers that are some number of standard deviations outside the norm, you're declared as sick, and otherwise you're okay. And if you look at all the patients in the Mount Sinai system and other systems, you can over time patients along the rows, time along the columns. See this transitioning of people into disease states as this binary thing. But when we really look at the data, you layer more in, like what's really happening around, the constellation of biomarkers or deeper data, sensory data, and so on, is you see people sliding into these conditions, like you see transition states and so on. So we became pretty interested in, how could we enable medicine, the physician, to kind of span this divide between the rapid rate of information and knowledge and understanding accumulation on the research side, but bringing that into practice on the clinical side to actually benefit patients. And so that became sort of a key driver of mine as I, sort of tired of, what I learned at Mount Sinai was the difficulty in bringing the kinds of models many of you here generate, that I myself generate on understanding disease and getting that into clinical practice, like a very difficult game. And so I have reflected a long time about why is that and what do we need to do, and so I'll talk some about that. The number one thing is we have to be able to leverage all this amazing data that we're now able to generate around patients. We need to be able to leverage that in ways that can give actionable guidance to, a whole bunch of different verticals, whether it's a physician, a patient, a payer, a pharmaceutical researcher. We need to take this data, and I've always thought about that data in terms of organizing that information, right, in the terms of these highly complex mathematical models, and then interpreting individuals that you see flying around this space in light of those models, given their data, projecting it on, and then being able to understand on an individual level, individualized trajectories of their health, be able to identify the systems that are, not only the systems that are disrupted, but what are the right kind of interventions that you want to do to actually bounce people off, the bad trajectory they're on, onto a good one, or maintain the good one that they're on. So that was the driver, and when I think about, all the data that we can now collect, with patient involvement, with health system involvement, and so on, we again can leverage the vast universe of the technology and the universe of information it generates. Again, one of the big drivers is this sequencing technologies, again, moving at super Moore's law speed, now actionable, clinically actionable enough where, everybody should have their genome sequenced. Whether you're a woman thinking you're becoming pregnant and you want to understand risk of passing bad disease onto your offspring, or non-invasive prenatal testing, or newborn screening, or drug safety, or heritable cancer, or even in the common, think of the polygenic risk score models going on now, even informing on common diseases in a way that's, in some cases, equivalent to Mendelian risk, right? So you can't ignore that, and that should be in practice. There's a lot of talk I heard in the panels and the speakers before me around the medical record data and how useful that is or isn't, as is existing within systems like Epic or Cerner. So the need to be able to go, and so think of a cancer patient. Like there's nothing you're going to understand about a cancer patient by looking at the structured data in an Epic system. That the only way you're going to understand that patient is by going into the physician notes, right, handwritten notes or typed notes, and abstract that information, abstract the knowledge out, structure those data and queries. So think of companies like Flatiron. So we're actively engaged in how can we abstract and restructure data, the data that's in these systems to make it actually mineable, queryable, and actionable to the physicians who need it. There's the idea that you need to be able to engage physicians with these data, and it's not just about having the best data or the best model. It's about having the right tools that allow them to engage the information in a way, and this is one of our journey tools that enables a physician to look at a patient's longitudinal journey through cancer and understand all the different tests that have been run, at what time they were run, what the results were, and so on. So it's giving you a snapshot view of what that patient's been through, something you'd never get through by querying a system like Epic. You're not going to get that kind of view. You need to create that view. And that allows the physician to start using that real-world evidence to start parsing apart, think of a patients like me kind of framework, looking at a given patient in the context of all the patients, the millions of patients we now have in this database, to understand, do patients like this on drug X or drug Y, how do those patients respond? And what drug, if I don't have a rational reason for picking X or Y, help me make that kind of selection. In addition to, so that's the genetic, the sequence-based data, the EMR-type clinical data. Of course, there's deeper molecular profiling data, so RNA sequencing, metabolomics, proteomics, glycomics, lipidomics, there's a whole, right, as everybody here knows, imaging data. So again, being able to sample more holistically around the system, and not only better construct those the way the molecular stuff hooks up to to the different organs, but how that hooks up to the physiology of the system. So how do you basically connect that molecular information to the physiologic to actually impact clinical medicine? So those data are important. And then, of course, a lot of people here, and we were early partners with Sage and Stephen on this, on the Health Kit Research Kit, and along with probably most people here, changed my thinking about how clinical medicine and research was going to be carried out in the future, being able to engage patients more seamlessly with devices and consent them in ways that facilitate both insights driven back to them, but aggregation of their data from a myriad of different sources to basically paint better pictures of the health of that patient. In this case, we were on that project, one of the asthma focus, and what we learned in the patients that actually used the app over time, and we acquired lots of data, a vastly superior view of that patient's condition emerged than existed in the health record, and that there was a strong want from physicians we were collaborating with to have that pushed up into the EMR systems to benefit the patients. So those are all areas that we focus on. And so now you have all of this data, and what do we want to do with it? We want to integrate it. We want to model it to come up with the best models. And this is one of the areas we have a pretty deep history in, both now at this semaphore effort that I launched out of Mount Sinai, but certainly with groups still at Sage and other parts. And the beauty of these models, like, as you know, what do we want to do? We want to have models that we can query, project on hypotheses or whatever other people's data, and then have the model tell us back what the response to that query is going to be. So whether it's, what is the impact of this mutation going to be? Here's the response the network gives and how it maps to clinical states, or what's the impact of this drug going to be, or this drug combination? Like those are the systems that we're building. And so to give you an idea of like how do we actually do all of that and start bringing it into the practice of medicine on patients, I'll give sort of the cancer work that we're doing, because cancer is kind of you're generating the right scales of data on patients, deep, high-dimensional, molecular, and higher order clinical imaging data. So how do we take that to inform? And I'll just give an example of what we're doing in lung cancer towards this end. So if you think about a patient who has lung cancer, and they come in, say, non-small cell lung carcinoma, and the kind of tests you'll typically see given on the molecular side is sequencing a panel for the patient, and they're focused on a set of genes, right? And what you're looking at here are genes that are known to be involved in key drivers in lung cancer, and the percentages are giving you the number of patients that are, through the sequencing of cohorts seen to carry driver mutations in those genes in that type of cancer. And so what a traditional genomics company will do is sequence and then look at what are the known driver mutations in these known genes. And one of the genes of interest is EGFR, because if you're EGFR positive, there's now a pretty good emerging standard of care set of drugs that can help you. But what do we know as modelers and biologists? We know that these genes aren't acting alone, right? They act in pathways, and what an oncologist really wants to know is this pathway activated or suppressed? So what you really want to know is whether you have activation of EGFR, which can occur without any activating mutation in EGFR, or you may have an activating mutation in EGFR, but that pathway is suppressed by alternative means. So just looking at EGFR alone is not really a good solution. And so again, what we're doing is, along with many here, but we'll show you how it's going into clinical practice, is you're now using a much more sophisticated model that's leveraging much more data on this type of cancer, and you're mapping the EGFR pathway to a more realistic nonlinear framework that's indicating whether EGFR is actually activated or suppressed. So you have a better understanding of the context, and that stands in contrast to looking at this single gene. And so the proof of whether this works or not, like what do you need to do to convince a physician to take this up into practice and report it out on a clinical report where they'll make a decision on it? Well, it's generating the right scale of evidence, which is if you make decisions based on that information, what happens with the patient. And so what you're looking at here is a retrospective look at lung cancer data, where if you're EGFR positive and say you're not tested to see if you're EGFR positive, so you're not put on this current standard of care drug for EGFR positive lung cancer patients, that's the survival curve that you're on, not the curve you want to be on. The red curve is if you get that traditional sequencing and EGFR positive is identified as being activated, then you're put on the appropriate drug and you're doing a heck of a lot better. But the blue curve is what happens if you have this model, this nonlinear higher dimensional model that's informing on your EGFR positive status. And you can see that you're significantly improved by a pretty significant degree over the traditional ways of testing. And why is that? It's because there's some patients who have EGFR activating mutations that do not have EGFR pathway activated. And so they're not going to respond to that drug. So we're able to exclude those and put those into a different line. And so you basically enrich through that test for people who will actually respond to the drug. So that's the kind of modeling we do. But what's the other thing I learned in this game beyond that sort of thing? And it's that to get that taken up into practice is way more difficult than you think. And so what we've kind of learned and started to master is how do you develop the right kind of relationship with patients and with health systems that kind of allow this sort of complexity to be introduced into the system. And so again, the idea is one of taking all of this, whatever your platform is, whether it's a Sage platform or the OpenAI platform, whatever it is, and the models that you're building, like you have to be able to convey that in ways to patients and physicians and payers and other healthcare providers in ways that make it clinically actionable. So that's the kind of system we focus very heavily on. And again, that's all about how do you introduce this into the workflow of a physician that's not disrupting that workflow and actually enables a physician to make more streamlined, better decisions for the patient. So that takes a lot of development time, a lot of education time with the physicians and the patients. So we have a never-ending sort of engaging and educating patients as partners. So how you consent a patient, what you consent them for, what they agree to in terms of both data aggregation and getting results and data back, portals to allow them to take that information, to share it with whomever they want. Like those are some of the cornerstones of what we're doing to get to the kind of uptake we need. But the same game has to be played with the physicians. Like the AI is not good enough today for us to think about that we can replace the physicians. That's not, we view our platform as an augmented intelligence platform. We're just helping augment the intelligence of a physician to help them engage the information and make those decisions. They have to be educated on that and so on. So that's a big part of it. And then there's also like who pays? Like how do you pay for this kind of thing to be carried out? These games, as we all know, are expensive. Digital software teams, data scientists, getting these kinds of systems worked out all costs a lot of money. And so one of the biggest things I underappreciated in playing this game was the value of having things like payer contracts and being able to go in and provide physicians and patients with a lower anxiety solution and a more streamlined solution that didn't disrupt flows and so on. So it's just a super critical component. And so with that, I'll sort of stop. Hopefully some questions about all of that and what we're doing. But I guess just leave you with, again, we have to think of it as a holistic solution. Like, again, these dimensions of let's just get the data. Let's just have really good modelers generating models from those data. Let's develop some software tools to convey. Like, those on their own are never going to be enough to get taken up into clinical practice. And, today what we have through this is we're testing well into the hundreds of thousands of patients a year. We're generating very large scales of data. We're generating clinical reporting and physician engagement to make decisions and so on. And so we hope to build this kind of learning system that can be used in a more general way. So thank you. There's a
While we're getting to the questioners, Eric, where do you see
Yeah, so it's a good point. Maybe didn't come through clearly enough. But again, the way we're engaging patients and consenting patients is really towards generating what we hope can be an open resource that even on the commercial side of things, the for-profit side of things, there's still value. Think of the open source, Red Hat and other sort of open endeavors on the commercial side that have been very successful. We think facilitating the open sharing of those data, empowering patients to be able to share that information, to make it more generally useful, is sort of a core part of what we're doing. And we think that will be, as you look at all the backlash that's happening with whether it's Google and the University of Chicago now being sued for what they do. You look at Memorial Sloan Kettering and the Page AI and the exclusivity they got around the pathology data. Like this want to hoard and own and protect data, I think it's just the wrong mindset. I think as the society generally gets better educated, the IQ comes up on what the data means to the individual and so on. I think it'll be these open efforts that rule the day.
Can you guys hear me? Okay, my name is Andrea. I am a VRCA community data organizer. Really great presentation. My question is, from a patient community's perspective, really excited about some of these beautiful visualizations. What do you think are the greatest challenges right now in natural language processing and making that useful as you sort unstructured text data signal from noise?
Yeah, well, I think there's, I would say, one of the bigger unsolved problems today are, how to, today what do we have to do in the NLP side when abstracting from physician notes? We have to, the AI can go some distance, and we can actually start classifying whether we think the AI will do a good job or a bad job given the notes that are before it. But it always requires a human intervention for the ones where especially it's doing a poor job. So we still depend on the human mind to kind of help correct mistakes that the AI may be driving. And nobody's really solved this effectively. So I think there's a ton of work still needed in innovation on how to advance kind of the state of NLP and its integration with deep learning and other types of algorithms to do a better job of more seamlessly abstracting that information. Because think of, we have over 10 million patients worth of data now in our database, and that includes physician notes, and that we can't go through all of that in an accurate enough way to make that all clinically actionable. Like we have to go targeted into specific areas because you need the experts to review and so on. So I think that's a huge, huge opportunity.
Hi, I'm Dan Atkins from the University of Michigan. I was really struck by the comment you made at the end about the augmented intellectual platforms and the investment in training both the physicians and the patients to use or accept or feel comfortable with. Could you say more about how you're doing that, and also maybe more generally, I assume a process of iterative design you're using for the whole system rollout?
Yeah, it's a good, love that question, because I have a really good, I have good success stories, and I have horrible, not good success stories. And the one good success story is, so think about a woman who's pregnant or thinking to become pregnant. Like they go through a journey, and it's a pretty sticky journey, and they get lots of different tests when you're thinking of becoming pregnant, and then once you're pregnant. And so what we're able to do to engage a patient, so since we're providing standard of care testing, so think carrier screening testing, non-invasive prenatal testing, newborn screening, drug safety. Like we're sort of natural partner with the patient and physician to guide them through and deliver those results back. And so we have a very natural touch point. We're doing all the genetic counseling, we're generating the clinical reports, we're giving the support to the physician. And so the patients, in going through that journey, when they digitally engage, like we have an email or a text phone number, 75 to 80%. So a huge sort of, and why is that? Is because we're viewed as a trusted partner, helping the physician. The physician wants us there because this data is complex. They don't know how to interpret it and so on. So it's a good partnership. So it's been a great success. Whereas it kind of broken down is we learned some hard lessons on think of the newborn side. We thought, okay, now mom has the baby or is soon going to have the baby. Wouldn't she want to know about all the diseases that you could detect on day one, and do something about clinically actionable. Like if you have this mutation, you're at 99% risk you're going to get this, and here's how you either prevent it or effectively treat it. And I'm like, who doesn't want to know that? Raise your hand. And what I found out is the women, the pregnant mom doesn't want to know about the 150 diseases that could befall the, the baby. So it's a positive experience, right? They want everything to be good, and there it's sort of a conflict with doctor. You know, the woman's like, well, why isn't this standard of care if it can help me? Like, why isn't my doctor saying that this is the right thing? Why isn't my insurance paying for it? Like, all of that, you know, became front and center. So in my mind, in engaging a patient deeply, it's all about in this trusted context, in a sticky situation where you have sort of, you know, physician buying in and so on, hugely successful. But if you're kind of outside of that, and it's a really difficult game that I think we haven't figured out on the consumer side how to play that.
Hi. Okay. Hi, I'm Carol Sibley from Genome Sciences here at University of Washington. I'm interested that you ended with that slide, and my question is sort of focused on that. Do you have a vision for having this be applied in a country where there's a rational universal health care coverage? France, for example, or there are lots of others.
Yeah, so
is that possible? I mean,
it is possible, and
yeah.
we're already moving towards that. So as you have big health systems who are taking on more of the management of the patient population, again, our transition that we hope away from having to bill for specific tests, and instead just accepting that we're going to take a much lower amount for the test and make hardly any margin, but we are information partner with the health system, and what we'll ultimately do is flip, you know, in the case of diagnostics, we'll flip that into an information business. Like, it won't matter who generates the data or what it even costs, because that cost is going to be very low. What's going to matter is the interpretation, the software-based query that you make, and that becomes a game that you don't have to get paid a lot to be sustainable. So that's our model, is that we're actually working now with big health systems where we have a very low cost, very low margin on the test, but we're information partner and can aggregate, make the models better, and feed that back into the system. That's kind of the goal. But as it stands today, like, you need to, if you can't play this game, like, it would be very difficult to stay in business. You know? Like, we wouldn't be able to evolve it. That's the reality.
So Eric, Jeff Bland, Personalized Lifestyle Medicine Institute. You know, I've been obviously following and impressed with your work for over a decade now, and putting what you just said, which was brilliant, together with the session we had earlier this morning, I'm wondering if some of this comes down to languaging. And, you know, a lot of this is around data, but data really is not what we're talking about, and I don't take it away from your presentation. We're talking about data information system, a new ecosystem. It's a whole new way of thinking. And I think when we start to talk about data management, it moves us into a place, languaging, that is not actually where we want to be housed in terms of open sourcing actionable information for which people will make positive decisions about their lives. So maybe the whole concept of data, open source data, particularly as it relates to biometric information, is a wrong context, because really you're talking about an ecosystem. You're talking about a network. You're not talking about data in and of itself. You're talking about a contextually connected bit of information that allows people to make more intelligent decisions. And I think if we could maybe relanguage this slightly, it might help move this forward more quickly in terms of adoption by clinicians as they start, because they may be a little bit data adverse, but they may be information that leads to patient engagement positive.
Yeah, so I love the comment, 100% agree. Like, I do think recasting it in that kind of light, that it isn't really about the management of the data, but it's the actionability of that information and how you convey it, and that it's not as, it seems like it should be straightforward because we're scientists and that's just how we think. But in the actual, you know, and get yourself out of the elite medical schools like a Mount Sinai or a Stanford, like go into the community hospitals and they're like like all of a sudden you know, it's a wholly different game that, yeah, so I like the comment.
So before we thank Eric again, I would be remiss if I didn't also acknowledge him for the role he played in founding SAGE 10 years ago and his role as a board member over the last 10 years. So thank you, Eric.
Right. Well, thanks. Thanks, Stuart. Thanks.